Or they're boneless, skinless, flash frozen the same day, and individually vacuum wrapped. Pick the size filet you want, the amount you want, and checkout's easy at fastfreshseafood.com. The best thing, every fish is on sale. Fastfreshseafood.com. Caught fresh for you, delivered straight to you. Stay home and stay safe.
From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski. So glad to have this time with you to learn, to grow together. This is a neighborhood experience that we do on live radio, FM, AM, coming to you across the Sunshine State on multiple signals. Those little wannabe gatekeepers at Facebook and Twitter and all those guys, they can't touch the terrestrial radio. And they're not going to touch the future if they don't change their bad habits. You cannot shill for establishment old ideas. You cannot continue to peddle a narrow framework of thinking and survive into the future as an institution or a company. You know, as I've said before, if we had a platform today, let's say there was a multi-billionaire who was pushing sacrificing goats to alleviate the plague. It doesn't matter how many billions they have, doesn't matter how many users they have, no matter how slick their advertising campaigns trying to convince us to sacrifice goats to avert plagues, we have enough information in our decentralized digital world to be able to push back against a dumb idea, even as much power as it has. Now, the ideas that are presented to us by the establishment gatekeeper institutions are not quite as transparently wrong for the modern viewer or listener, right, as sacrificing animals to avert a plague, right? But nevertheless, the same reality is in play. If you hold on to a bad, terrible idea in a decentralized information world where knowledge is decentralized, sooner or later, your attempts at strong-arming that bad idea to perpetuate it further across the finish line will fall apart. And so today I want to have a conversation about what it means to have skin in the game. Recently, I saw an article published this week at fee.org about Elon Musk and Robert Reich, who is this guy who, you know, he was the former U.S. Labor Secretary with Clinton, and he, you know, has always been a kind of advocate for trying to cure capitalism and heal it and stop the excesses in that same old corporate line that we hear over and over again. So I want to have the author of this piece. He's been on the program before. He's the managing editor for fee.org, John Miltimore. How you doing, John?
Doing great, David. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And this article is talking about Elon Musk tortures this guy, Tony Stark style, over modern-day robber baron claim. Now, to set the table here, there's been a little bit of a tiff going on between these two.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of started on Twitter, although, you know, as I explained, it goes a little bit deeper than that. But, you know, as a lot of people know, Tesla has had an incredible year. Their stock, I actually owned Tesla stock this year for a while. I stupidly sold it. I wish I would have just held it. But yeah, it's been going through the roof. It's up about 600% from its low on the year. And, you know, Elon Musk was rich to begin with, but now he's really rich. He's about 5 times as rich as, you know, Tony Stark. He's worth, you know, it bounces around. Right now, Elon's net worth is about $80 billion. And this seemed to really bug Robert Reich because he tweeted at him and he pointed out that for few months earlier this year, Tesla employees during the pandemic had to take a pay cut. And meanwhile, Elon Musk's stock quadrupled, and he became one of the wealthiest people on the planet.
Yeah, and so what's the pushback? Elon responded?
Yeah, well, that was kind of fun. I got to say, as much as we hate Twitter, it's also very cool for stuff like this, right? You have people that can gauge and kind of chirp at each other. And Elon did respond. And like I said, it's kind of something like Tony Stark would do, right? Like Iron Man doesn't just kind of take something like that. And neither did Elon Musk. And he pointed out that Tesla workers also get shit. And they benefit from the stock increase just like anyone else. They have equity in the company. And he called Reich a modern day moron, because Reich should have called him a modern day robber baron.
So this, I think, is a story that gives us a tale of two ways of dealing with problems. You have one, a guy who, I don't know his entire career, but Robert Reich is someone who basically works in the world of politics, where you talk. And then you have someone like Elon Musk who does stuff. So Robert talks about how, people need to have wealth and the poor people are not getting enough wealth. And then someone like Elon creates opportunities for people to have more wealth. People like Robert talk about climate problems and pollution. And then you got people like Elon who is trying to do something about it, right? So I think this is a contest that illustrates something at the core of what's going on with our society, No,
I think you're right. And the contrast was kind of fun to look at, right? Because, Elon Musk is like the American dream guy. He's a billionaire. He's a philanthropist. Tesla employs 50,000 workers. Its market cap is $380 billion. Last year they produced about, 370,000 cars. Like, they're going to produce more this year. He's created all this stuff, and he's made the world, tangibly, materially a much better place. Reich publishes books and he goes on programs. He's really a class warrior, and that's where, he's done well too. He's worth several $1 million. But he's done it in a very different way, and I think he's done it by kind of tapping into grievance and telling people what they should do, telling companies how they should treat their workers and what they have to do, and kind of, agitate. And I think there is a contrast there that was kind of, worth exploring.
So how do, you focus a lot on trying to get young people to really understand the ethics and moral case for liberty. What do you think has been the most effective way to do that? I mean, that's what you do every day, is you're trying to figure out how to write an article or develop a piece of content that can generate interest among younger folks to find liberty the morally correct choice.
It's not easy to do, because I think we're kind of trained today to see the world through a different lens. I think for a lot of, American history, that wasn't the case. We kind of instinctively understood the inherent value of liberty, even as we were trying to get it right. Like anybody, we know American history didn't always have these things right, but we were working toward that. Today, I think people are trained to see the world more through this lens of, I hate to say it, but the sort of neo-Marxist lens of oppressed and oppressor. And I think one of the things we do at FEE, and we do it well, but it's difficult, is trying to get people to not see the world through that lens of oppressed and oppressor, and trying to see people through the lens of, like our motto, anything peaceful, that people working together in voluntary arrangements, that is going to produce a better world.
I think the average person who is younger who rejects that idea would say, here's the deal. I got one team, the Democrats, promising me democratic socialism, free college, free health care, free, mandatory minimum wage, $15, stuff like that. And then we have another situation where this right wing says they're going to do free markets, but they never do. So if I'm stuck with a mixture of market greed and inequality mixed and all heavily regulated. And it's like you're stuck in between two poles. And one team saying, hey, go keep coming this way and you'll get to socialism with us and we'll take care of you. And then the other team saying, no, back up the car and come back this way and we're going to give you free markets. And I think the customer of the political class, the political voters, they're saying, I think I'm going to go with the team that says democratic socialism because on the track record of governance, when we go with them, we get, it may not be the best quality, but we get something free. So for a while, it may not be the best market, but we get something rather than nothing. And this team talking about free markets, every time we give them power, they don't give us, they're not, I don't think their argument, of course, is this nuance, but I think intuitively they feel this way. Like whatever this free market brand that I'm being sold on, it doesn't give me what they said it was going to give me, which is a rising tide lifts all boats and capital and savings and a better job and a better healthcare and cures for cancer. And so they're kind of like stuck between two problematic projects. And I think they're saying, let's just keep driving the car towards socialism. It's not the best scenario, but it'll give me some freebies that I need because I can't take this rigged game. What's your take to that?
I think you're exactly right in the analysis, and I think it's a challenge. I think one of the things I would say is first reject the whole binary framework that you have one team over here and one team over there. It's not my job to tell people, to vote for candidate X. I don't really, I personally don't see, politics matters. Like who we put in office does matter. I'm not going to deny that. But I think our goal is to really change the way people think about these problems and to recognize that the creep of collectivism comes with very, severe consequences. But it is tough, especially in a year like 2020, right? Like there was nobody saying like, yeah, maybe the government isn't in a great position to address these problems. Like there was really, outside of a few organizations like FEE, nobody was really making that case. Certainly nobody in politics. Maybe again, a few, outliers that kind of did, but everybody was thinking that governments were going to have to protect us with lockdowns, that government was going to have to send those checks to people who weren't working, that government was going to be, the way we fixed this scary pandemic.
Right.
But I do think that the further we get along, we're seeing that approach was a failure. It was a failure on every level. The economic destruction we're just beginning to see. We saw, the civil unrest that was, I believe, very much as well a product of telling people that putting them basically under house arrest in their homes and telling them they couldn't go out. You have, things like suicide, drug overdoses, things like that are surging, domestic abuse. So I think eventually we will look back and say, wow, we maybe thought government was the way to solve that problem, but it was a disaster.
Yeah, the question is, are we going to learn before it's too late, or are we going to slip into a really terrible place where we're going to have a lot of stagnation, a lot of lost years of wasted opportunity and dark ages? But we're going to continue to unpack this question with John Miltimore, managing editor for Fee.org, when we continue. Stay tuned. A Neighbor's Choice. Back in a second. David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents. The law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
I'm attorney Young Kim. The financial problems caused by the coronavirus nightmare are not going away anytime soon. If you are behind on your credit card or mortgage payments, or bill collectors are harassing you, there are ways to get them off your back and legally wipe the slate clean. Call Consumer Law Attorneys at 888-99-FRESH for a free consultation. Learn how we can stop the bank and collection companies and help people in debt get a fresh start. Call 888-99-FRESH, 37374. Main office, St. Petersburg.
Our monetary system is failing. Negative interest rates, growing debt, highly speculative market, and the dollar is being devalued by the Fed. Investing your wealth has never been more challenging. Who wants to earn just 1% interest annually in a savings account? There is another option, monetary metals. They pay interest on gold, in gold, with no storage costs ever. Visit interestongold.com/David. That's interestongold.com/David. Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm your host, David Gornosky. And we're here with John Miltimore, who's the managing editor for fee.org. Talking about, well, first we talked about Elon Musk and Robert Reich and the difference, the tale of two types of leaders in our society. John, I'm a big believer, I talk a lot about mimetic theory and anthropology, and I think that's the cutting edge of where we need to go if people like liberty. Because if you don't know how a human came to be, if you don't know how society came to be, if you don't know where government, if you think government just like popped up as some kind of conspiracy, then you're going to be woefully ill-equipped to be able to understand why it's so contagious and why it's so hard to get people to stop worshiping the state, right? But when I look at the way human beings stand in awe of the state as some kind of transcendent that can go after the people that they hate the most, whether it's someone around the world or if it's someone in their neighborhood that they're jealous of. Maybe they hate trial lawyers, maybe they hate capitalists, maybe they hate farmers, maybe they hate soy, whatever it is, there's always this transcendent religious ecstasy that people feel when they go to this grievance culture that government fosters, right? This idea that, hey, Elon Musk, I'm jealous of him. He makes cars that look like Batman cars. He has rockets. I can't seem to keep a legitimate job with a dignified wage and a dignified, lifestyle. And so people look at that, and the more they feel theoretically closer to getting to that level, the more they feel farther apart, and the more they are filled with envy, And I think that's the real thing that we have to be able to talk about for those of us who prefer peace and freedom,
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's interesting because you do see it's not just people I think might naturally adopt that view like wow, look at everything he's got, look how little I got, but we also have people that actively, the Robert Reiches out there who are actively telling them that you're a victim, that he's taking from you with his success. And, it's funny, just during the commercial break, I ran the numbers a little bit, and I looked at Tesla's stock price. And, a decade ago, that stock was $3.80. Like, that's what it's valued at now. There was a stock split recently, so it would have been valued differently at the time. But today's value of the stock, $3.80 a decade ago. And today it's about $440. So if you look at those Tesla workers, they're on the assembly line, the engineers doing the work. I just wonder how many people are millionaires today because they were taking advantage of stock options. And this idea that they were victimized by getting paid a wage and collecting stock, I think is ludicrous. I think, I'm sure there's hundreds of people are millionaires today, thousands maybe, that they got that from working for Tesla. And they probably don't view themselves as victims. They probably look at them, they're very grateful for that opportunity. But we do have people that want to train people in that victim mentality.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting, we have to figure out how to cultivate role models, right? Isn't that the thing that really comes down to it? If we want to have a media is a vehicle. It's a place where people come together to have a medium of exchange and of conversation and ideas. And if it's dominated by role models on both sides who are like Robert Reich, not to pick on him, but it's just a guy trying to, again, build up grievance and build up, he's not building anything, he's not creating. Why doesn't he create cold fusion? Why doesn't Robert go into a lab or put his money and invest it into creating low temperature nuclear energy? That's a real thing. Some people are working on that. But that's not what we don't have those kind of role models to look up to. There's just a couple, really,
No, it's true. And that's one of the reasons I like to write about Elon Musk, because he is that. He's got that Tony Stark style edge. He's cool, right? Like, you can recognize that he's brilliant. He's cool. He's a billionaire. He's kind of a bad boy. We remember on Joe Rogan, he smoked a joint on the show. He did all that stuff. And he kind of is one of the, it feels like you point out, we don't have enough heroes today, and that's for a lot of reasons. But when you see, somebody like this that is a visionary, and there's a good learning lesson in that. Like, no, people, Tesla workers aren't victims. They're part of something, really cool, and they're making the best, these incredible cars. I've never ridden in one, so I guess I can't claim that they're that great, but I hear they're wonderful. And I think we need to tell those stories and help people understand that wealth creation doesn't happen automatically. Behind wealth creation, there's a ton of work and energy and capital that goes into that. And if you take that away, there are consequences.
Yeah, it's interesting how this works. And I don't think I have to continue to emphasize to folks who talk about free markets that reason's not going to cut it. You have to have something appeal to aspiration and storytelling. You have to get something closer to the gut. And that's not a formula. It's just you either got that talent or not in terms of telling good stories. And that's something that we need to really think about. I want to hold you, we're going to take a quick news break, but when we continue, I want to ask you a little bit about your article you did with Dan Sanchez about the New York Times and cultural Marxism. Let's talk about that in just a moment. But this is important because we have to be able to understand the culture that manifests the political annoyances that we are all kind of dealing with. If we don't understand culture and how to shift culture, how to cultivate it in the right direction, then we won't be equipped to be able to have a fighting chance against the forces of anti-culture, which is envy and violence. I'm David Gornowski. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. We'll be back in just a moment after this quick news break.
Time of year it is.
Hurricane conditions in the next 36 hours.
You know what hurricanes can do.
Devastating damage expected.
But we want you to know, no matter how bad things get,
Power outages.
This is life-threatening.
you can stay up to date with the latest information here. Your home for news, talk, and information. And remember, we'll keep an eye on the tropics. You keep an ear on us.
Got batteries in the flashlight.
The all-new News Talk 1040 WHBO.
Radio.
Top White House health officials testifying today, telling lawmakers if a coronavirus vaccine is ready this fall, first responders will get it first, along with high-risk groups. Most Americans will not get vaccinated until late 2021. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden criticizing President Trump for his response to the pandemic and push for a vaccine ahead of Election Day. Biden says he'll put his faith in sound research.
I trust vaccines. I trust scientists. But I don't trust Donald Trump.
Fed Chair Jerome Powell explaining the decision by the Fed Reserve Board to keep interest rates low for the foreseeable future. Many Americans have been financially crippled in this pandemic. Powell says many of those who have been most affected are women.
The high level of joblessness has been especially severe for lower wage workers in the services sector, for women, and for African Americans and Hispanics.
The board is trying to manage inflation with economic recovery. Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Neighbor's Choice returns. I'm David Gornosky, your host. We're live across the Sunshine State. Drive time, prime time. And what are we doing? We're talking about things like peace. You know, it's a breath of fresh air you get when you're on a Neighbor's Choice, because you get 10,000 programs in broadcast media, all parroting the same he said, she said, this said, looking for a political savior. And on this program, we're political atheists. We don't believe that God is found in man's institutions in terms of these ideas of statism, and that the state can remake our lives, and that they can save us from our greed. They can save us from our social unjust ideas in our heads and so forth. We don't believe in that kind of superstition here. So joining me to talk about what we can do in this context is John Miltimore, who's the managing editor for fee.org. You can look up, their website, fee.org, and I've got several articles of mine that have been big hits over the years there as a little archive there. I think you got them still there, right? Don't you, John? You didn't take them down, did you?
Oh, yeah, they're all up there.
All right, those are in the classics section, right? So let's go back to this story here I wanted to get your take on. You wrote it last week, called "The New York Times Reported the Mainstreaming of Marxism in U.S. Colleges 30 Years Ago. Today we see the results." And, you're basically making this piece as a kind of chronicling of how Marxism evolved out of being focused on economic issues and kind of took a detour into stirring up fighting and hate on a cultural frame, right?
Right. Yeah, it was an interesting piece, done by the Times in 1989. A friend sent it to me, and she pointed out that it might offer might make a good article for fee. And it was interesting because, in 1989, it's in the fall, and global communism is collapsing. Right. Around the world, we're seeing the Soviet Union collapse, and basically the bankruptcy of Marxism is being exposed for all to see. But at that same time, the New York Times pointed out that Marxism was really flourishing in U.S. universities, and it was kind of an interesting contrast. But the article also noted it wasn't traditional Marxism. It was becoming less and less focused on economics. I think out of necessity, because the economic problems of Marxism were pretty apparent by then. We saw all that data coming out of the Soviet Union for years was all crap, that they were an incredibly poor society in an authoritarian one. So what we saw in U.S. universities was a sort of pivot. They were moving into gender inequality, critical race theory, other these sort of other neo-Marxist ideas. And you could, the Times didn't really take a critical look at it. They're just kind of exploring them. And if you look at the professors quoted in those pieces, they were very excited about these changes because they saw, great promise in sort of, sowing the new seeds for Marxism.
Yeah. So, we've heard, though, that when you say neo-Marxism or cultural Marxism, places like the New York Times would say that's a conspiracy theory you're proposing. That's there's
but,
no.
It's kind of funny because, I mean, they might say that today, but in 1989, they were very much treating it as a real idea. And they were talking about it openly. And I think that is one of the struggles. I think I had a section in the article that we ended up cutting it. The article was getting too long. But it kind of talks about that, how Marxism, Marxists today don't really like to refer to themselves as Marxists. A lot of their ideas, are very much stem from that. But I think there's like a conscious effort, an aversion for that term. And I think it's sort of like the idea, this did make it in the piece. I think I quoted Upton Sinclair, who noted that Americans, they'll embrace socialism, but not that it's called socialism. So I think there is kind of a conscious effort to not call these, even if you are pushing ideas that might stem from Marxism, to not identify it as Marxism.
Now, what you hear, though, when you hear about like the more Marxist hardcore left, you'll hear them say, like Zizek he used to mock Jordan Peterson's language about cultural Marxism, right? He would say that's ridiculous. This is they basically try to disavow the politically correct stuff and say that's neoliberalism. That's the co-opting of the left away from class issues and directing it into toothless cultural grievance issues. That is a very, very favorable thing for big corporations. So that's a critique that's very similar to the one that I make. I call them corporate communists. But to be fair to those on the left, like Zizek, like programs like the Red Scare, the popular podcast, these folks say no. This politically correct social justice silly stuff is what they would call neoliberalism, not Marxism.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly an argument to be had there, and that's sort of, and I'll be honest, I've kind of taken that approach. I think it's something that I think is kind of gentlemanly, and the right thing to do is if people don't identify themselves as that, I'm not going to call them that. And this was addressed I don't know if you read it, David, but there was a great article in Quillette on the challenge of Marxism, and it kind of touched on that point. Like Marxism today, assuming that we're not, just crackpots, that there is sort of, a rise of it in America today, and I believe there is. It step by step, identified why it's a challenge. And one of them was we kind of don't know what to, how to label some of these doctrines. Social justice. I think social justice today is a word that you're seeing all over. We're seeing it in Major League Baseball, in the NFL, and corporate America, as you point out. I think if you look at the roots of social justice ideology, it's not hard to see that it stems directly from Marxist ideas.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing that it's hard to nail these things down, because you got one group saying, "Oh no, we're Marxists, but we don't have any time for this politically correct social justice stuff," and then you do see Marxists say all about the politically correct stuff. So it's kind of hard to trace all the the intellectual genealogy of these things, and figure out where is this all coming from.
It is. It goes back to something I mentioned earlier. It's sort of like the idea of that the whole world now sees the everything through the prism of oppressed and oppressed, or oppressed and oppressor. Excuse me. And I think that's sort of what social justice ideology. What you see is there's this assumption that different groups in society have more than others. And the ones who have less are the oppressed, and the ones who have more are the oppressors. And social justice ideology says we have to correct that. And they have no problem using coercion to make that happen.
Yeah, but this envy, weaponizing envy like this, once it bakes into a culture, do you think that there's any way to reform America's culture? Or do you think we're going to have to just wait for liberty to blossom in other places around the globe, and we're going to go into lights out for a while?
It's a tough question. I don't think, these ideas didn't happen overnight, so it's not going to be fixed overnight. But I think it really starts with being able to recognize these ideas for what they are, and to say, like, look, we're being taught to view all these things through this lens of an oppressor. But is that really the reality of things? Aren't we individuals? Like, are people truly oppressed today? Like, if you look around, we're the wealthiest, country in the world in many metrics. We're, historically just incredibly wealthy. Is there rampant oppression everywhere? And there's certainly inequality, like as far as, some people have more than each other, but is that a bad thing? Like, isn't it perfectly natural that some people are going to have more than other people?
Right. Yeah, and that's something that I think we all, as long as, I think the issue, John, is that as long as people feel like it's a fair game and that there's secrets of nature left to be explored, then people have a spirit that can put up with someone having more than them. But when they feel like all of science, we're at the end of physics, we're at the end of biology, we're at the end of chemistry, we've had a war on cancer since the 60s, it's not been cured. All these things, it just feels like there's no pioneer, there's no big ideas, there's no big secrets of nature, we're not going to get anti-gravity. Why? Because somebody did an equation, that's why. Oh, okay, thanks. It's like we have such a very low view of dreaming and creating extravagant new ideas. And I think when we have that environment, there's no way liberty ideas and nonviolence and restraint can win out over weaponized envy. It's just going to get its clock cleaned,
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And it's one of those, you might have seen this. Remember, like, Malcolm Gladwell and Steven Pinker debating on whether or not the world is actually getting better or worse. And I kind of go back and forth. In many ways, the world is getting better, right? Like, we have more wealth. The world is actually getting greener, although people don't, realize that. You can say we're living longer. All these ways, the world's getting better. But you can also see something else happening. And I think you're onto something. I think we are kind of losing a spirit. I think I think there's a lot of despair in the world right now. And I think like one thing I asked people, fellow libertarians who are convinced the world's always getting better, I said, are we freer today than we were, 20 years ago, 50 years ago? Because that matters too.
Right. And it's a chicken or the egg. It's like we need to create amazing innovations that will create the feeling of hope in the society so that people can tolerate not having as much as somebody else because they're like, well, my life is better. For example, just imagine, John, for a moment that, some Elon Musk or Tesla type entrepreneur, just found a very non-toxic, very, very dirt cheap solution for cancer, right? And imagine that burden that many people are afraid of and have to deal with was just, taken into the realm of scurvy, not a big deal anymore. How much more hope would that free up? How much more capital in the market would that free up? How much more happiness and joy? How much more tension relief would that introduce that maybe someone wouldn't go out in the streets and scream at somebody while they're having dinner in Rochester, New York? Maybe if that big monster that affects us all in various ways could be taken out, maybe that would give people a sign that, hey, maybe there's still this wonderful world that we can make better. But nobody believes that right now. And it's this chicken or the egg thing, John, because you need government out of the way to kind of help those innovations come to the surface, right? But because government never gets out of the way, then people say, well, there's no big solutions we can hope for,
Yeah, no, it is. The good thing is, like, we still do have very much a market economy, right? We still do see all this capital flowing into these different technologies and treatments, and I think we are going to see all kinds of new breakthroughs, and maybe that will, create this uplifting effect, But I think the issues might run deeper than that, and there are problems. I think you brought up just the idea of fairness and. I always have to point this out, like, as much as I applauded, like, Elon Musk in the article, it's worth pointing out that Tesla has gotten billions of dollars in subsidies. And, like, the critical theory folks are really good at pointing out some of these, cognitive dissonances, really, like these things that don't really, mesh, finding the holes in sort of the success, story. And there are a lot of those. And, so I think, that our system is very complex. And in some ways, even the success stories also have a yeah, but.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. You didn't earn that. You didn't earn that money on a good faith basis. You used it because you're privileged, or because you gamed the system. That's what it's always built on. And there's a truth to that, right? If you don't have, there's a real criticism there that says, hey, if you have an industry that's heavily regulated and protected, and therefore you're a very rich person, or you inherited a lot of wealth from a person who benefited from a heavily regulated industry, then yeah, there is a real legitimate truth to the idea that you didn't earn that wealth in a free way like you say you did, right? There's a little bit of a mixture there, right?
Exactly. And, that's part of, the problem with that, just to push back on that, is the government's involved in everything today, right? There's nothing they don't subsidize or have a tax break for this or that. So it's not hard to find those things. And the truth is, I don't blame, Elon Musk for taking the money, right? Like, Milton Friedman would tell you he had an obligation to take anything like that as a responsibility to his shareholders. And, just like I can look at Social Security and say, gosh, I don't think that's a good program. I would change it in a lot of ways to abolish it. But I am going to take, my check when it comes to me, because I've been paying my whole life too. Right. So I don't think that necessarily makes Elon Musk a hypocrite, but these are just, it is part of the story.
But if you're like and I don't want to pick on a particular industry, because but if you're like, soy gets a lot of subsidies, by the government, or corn, and you inherited money from a generational giant corporation that's getting a lot of heavy subsidies for corn from the government, it's kind of hard to argue against the guy who's saying, I want my free health care and I want my free college. You got your free handout and you've inherited your wealth and you've got your privilege and you've got your gated community and blah, blah, blah. And it's directly, you can see the money, the dollar amounts and so forth going into your industry from our government. Why can't I get a similar, deal for myself? And that's a hard argument. And that's why the Republicans and Conservative Inc. loses so much, and I know you're not part of that, but that's why they're losing the argument.
No, but you're
right?
exactly right. It undermines like this idea that everybody's on an even playing field, right? And that is the beauty of a truly capitalist system is everybody's fighting it out the same. We're all competing to get the next best product to create wealth and value. But there's a reality. There's a reality that the governments are involved in so much, especially today. But even going back to the 19th century, guys like Rockefeller. Most of the capitalists of the 19th century got, government help as well. And so, yeah, there is the question of fairness is kind of a persistent one.
So let me ask you, this is just a kind of personal question I have. So why do you think, because you work a lot, again, in trying to help explain ideas of liberty and freedom, why do you think there's a big focus on personal freedom when explaining free market type voluntary economy versus emphasizing the nonviolent part of it, right? Because see, the way I talk about these things, I don't talk about personal freedom as much. I do, it's important, but I try to focus on what's the nonviolent way of handling our problems, right? And I don't see that talked about enough to me in liberty circles. It's not so much about me. It's about what am I allowed to do in relationship to my neighbor? That to me is the more important question. And I think that's the more persuasive question. Because people, if you tell people, you have an inalienable right to, do heroin and drive without your seatbelt. People are like, no, that's libertarianism. It's ridiculous, right? And that becomes a caricature, right? As opposed to saying, okay, we're not going to put about me, but what about if you have a neighbor that's high on heroin is putting them in a cage where they could be assaulted. Is that going to help anybody in that situation? You know, and so that's a different shift. You see the difference?
I do, yeah. It's interesting. I never thought about it in that perspective before. But I do think they both matter. And I think you're right. Like, you know, voluntary action is the best. And you know, anything peaceful that isn't infringing on your neighbor is behavior that we should kind of, you know, butt out from for the most part. And, you know, I've read most of your pieces, David, if not all. And I have noticed that theme in there. And I think it's a really powerful one, and one that probably, you know, libertarians, generally speaking, can probably, you know, do a better job of you know, communicating on that front.
Well, I think that's why the social justice crowd has such a monopoly on the whole moral high ground argument, right? Because they're always talking about it's not right to do this, it's not right to do this, it's not right to do this. And then the libertarian argument is like, well, it's my right to do what I want, and it just doesn't sell as well. So it doesn't persuade on the gut level. So I appreciate your time, John Miltimore. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and we'll continue to follow your work at fee.org. Thanks for joining us, John.
Hey, thanks a lot, David. Take care.
Very good. We'll continue live on A Neighbor's Choice. Back in just a moment. David Gronowski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
Not ready to go to your favorite seafood restaurant? Get the highest quality fish for less delivered straight to your door by Fast Fresh Seafood. Order our fresh hot snapper, grouper, mahi, and more. They're boneless, skinless, flash frozen the same day, and individually vacuum wrapped. Pick the size filet you want, the amount you want, and checkout's easy at fastfreshseafood.com. The best thing, every fish is on sale. Fastfreshseafood.com. Caught fresh for you, delivered straight to you. Stay home and stay safe.
Coronavirus is threatening the entire world. Can we protect you and your family? Even getting tested can cost you up to $3,200 out of pocket. Would you be able to afford that for you and your family? Well, free Obamacare will cover and protect today. New insurance may cost you nothing. Zero premium plans are available. If you've lost your job, you must call 877-652-0244 or text VIRUS to 919191 or log on to freeobamacare.com. Call us today. We'll get you enrolled, get you qualified coverage to protect you from not only this outbreak, but day in and day out sickness and illness. Our plans cover visits, testing, emergency and urgently needed care, medications, and more. Now more than ever, you need to act now and call now. No long lines, and we can get you coverage today. That's 877-652-0244 or text VIRUS to 919191. That's 877-652-0244.
Our monetary system is failing. Negative interest rates, growing debt, highly speculative market, and the dollar is being devalued by the Fed. Investing your wealth has never been more challenging. Who wants to earn just 1% interest annually in a savings account? There is another option, monetary metals. They pay interest on gold, in gold, with no storage costs ever. Visit interestongold.com/David. That's interestongold.com/David. Neighbor's Choice is back. I'm David Gronowski, your host. Just had a great discussion with John Miltimore, our managing editor at fee.org, and talking about the cultural foundations for why we have such a, envy-driven society. We've always had envy has been with humanity since the beginning, but I think what I was suggesting is something that we need to really take a big, hard look at, which is how do we talk about liberty, right? So someone online said there can on YouTube, it was kind of funny, ironic. Someone on YouTube listening to our show said there can be only one, me. And then Larry on our Facebook said about we. So he's saying one says me, the other one says we, right? And the whole cultural power. Why is it that the left wing has controlled Hollywood and music and so forth and the storytelling apparatus of our society? Because, they talk about we a lot. And the idea of we usually sells better than the idea of me. Now, they go hand in hand. It's kind of a weird paradox there because in our society today, Hollywood and everything, they want bigger and bigger government. They want control over what you can say, what you can post on Facebook. Can't say anything about wars. That's called hate speech now. These little stupid celebrity type people are saying stuff like this. You can't talk about, alternative medicine. You can't talk about non-patented medicine. Can't talk about critiques against the, police state or anything like that, or you're totally ostracized as a hate speech. That's what these silly parrot types are saying in Hollywood. And so there's a weird paradox where they're very collectivist politically and very aggressive, very, very big into coercion and censorship. But at the same time, they're very self-absorbed, in the culture that they transmit. The culture they transmit is all about me, 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 but yet they want a politics and a culture that's we. It's a weird mix, right? Strange. And there's something to that we need to really unpack. And we try to, in my articles on neighborschoice.com and around the internet on different publications. And when you talk to conservatives, they tend to be more about, it's all about facts. It's not about feelings. No, that's not correct at all. Feelings and facts should go together, right? Human beings are moved and changed in deep ways by what we call feelings. Feelings are everything, and there's no way that we have to cede the ground that logical facts are somehow in opposition to feelings. Feelings and facts can go hand in hand together. And that's what makes people resonate with truth and resonate with change and get on board with a new movement of something that can impact their world. But when you hear conservatives and libertarians, they talk about me, my individual rights, my this, my free speech, my gun, my this. And look, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but is it actually winning the culture? And I would say you can get the we conversation back into the mix of things when you focus on not so much about me, but about what am I allowed to do in relationship to my neighbor? Do I have a right to put my neighbor in a cage because of them not paying a wage that I think they should? Do I have a right to put them in a cage because they said something I find hateful? Do I have a right to put them in a cage because they owned a gun that I'm scared of? Do I have a right to put them in a cage if they did a drug that I'm terrified could lead to violence? How about alcohol? That could lead to violence. How about cigarettes? That could lead to a drain on the healthcare system. So we can use all of these justifications, and we do in our politics, to preemptively use violence against our neighbor. And if we reshape that question and say, no victim, no crime, you've opened up a whole new paradigm for the future. I'm David Gronowski. Email me hello@neighborschoice.com. We'll be back in just a moment.